Thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. Honestly, there's not going to be a whole lot of setup for our look at the seventh deadly sin. We live in a culture that is obsessed with sexuality. We see it everywhere. It's plastered across the billboards when we drive down the highway. We see it on the TVs in our home. We see it on the internet. We even find it at the grocery store checkout lines. Everywhere you look, there's an abundance of sexual material, sexual innuendo, sexual stuff. Innuendos dominate our culture. It doesn't matter if when you got into your car, you flipped to the country station or the jazz station, the rock station or the rap station. Our music is saturated with references and allusions to sex. USA Today reported that 70% of all material on television within a given week had sexual material or innuendos associated with it. And television shows that are aimed at our children or teenagers are not exempt. By the time a young person graduates from high school, they will have viewed nearly 14,000 sexual references every year. When I was a kid, we could find adult-themed material. We just had to go looking for it. Now, our kids carry around a little device in their pockets that offer them immediate and unlimited access. According to Google, back in 1993, when the internet went public, there were no sexually explicit sites available. Fast forward 4 years to 1997, and there are over 72,000 explicit websites. And today, we don't know how many explicit websites are out there, but we believe that it's in the millions. There are tons of things dedicated to the consumption and creation of pornographic content. Adult platforms are big business. If you took the combined revenue of the National Hockey League, the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball, you still wouldn't reach the amount of money that the sex industry made last year alone. I realize that this sermon about the seventh deadly sin is likely to be the most uncomfortable 22 minutes in the entire series. Lust is a difficult thing to talk about, especially in mixed company, even though both genders struggle with it. As a matter of fact, all of the research that we have on human sexuality shows that desire, including and especially sexual desire, is the greatest motivational factor in all of the decisions that we make. In lust and desire doesn't care about gender, age, nationality, or economic status. Most of the time, men and women lust after very different things, but that's just kind of quibbling over the specific objects at which our lust is aimed. The intensity of desire, the damage that it does, and the solutions to it are all the same. So even though this might not be loads of fun, it is something we need to talk about. I believe a part of the problem we have in confronting the seventh deadly sin is the same one that we've had with all of the sins throughout the series. We have to wrestle with two definitions. There's the original biblical classical sense in which the word is used, and then there's the contemporary usage of the word. If you were to go out and ask people on the street, what does lust mean? They would talk about sexual desire, and that's not an altogether wrong answer. It's not altogether right either. Our definitions of lust are too narrow and too limiting. We only talk about lust in sexual terms, and maybe we do that for a reason. There's an old adage that sex sells, and that seems to be true. Advertisers have always used scantily dressed men and women to sell everything from deodorant to cigarettes to soda to cars to underwear to microwave ovens. And before you ask, yes, there is actually a print ad for a microwave from the 70s that had a woman dressed in a small chiffon nightgown with perfect hair and perfect makeup. The truth is that lust is this strong, passionate desire for something, not just sex. We can lust after all kinds of things. We can lust after food, drink, money, fame, power, knowledge. Our lust is associated with a strong craving and desire. But those desires aren't necessarily sinful. Very often, it's the desire that causes us to move. Your desire to have a healthier lifestyle caused you to change your diet or to go out and to get exercise. Your desire to help people in need is why you go to the soup kitchen, or you help people that are struggling financially or physically. Your desire for Christ is why you boldly tell your friends and your neighbors about the hope that you have in the resurrection. And it was your desire for that man or woman that you made your husband or wife that caused you to enter into a marriage and to start a family. I think perhaps this is a good place as any to remind you that sex was God's idea. It was God's idea to create male and female. It was God that told Noah and his family when they left the ark to be fruitful and multiply. As I thought about our lesson, I was concerned that our knee-jerk reaction would be to label our sexuality as the problem. But it's not the desire that's wrong. It's what we do with that desire. You know as well as I do that our Bibles are filled with stories that deal with men and women who allowed their desires to lead them down a dark and painful path. Judah and Tamar, the men of Sodom, David and Bathsheba, Amnon and a different Tamar, Absalom and the entire harem of his father David, just to name a few. But lust is so much more than merely a sexual struggle. Many times in the series, we've gone back to Genesis 3, to the original sin in the Garden of Eden. We talked about how pride, envy, greed, and gluttony were all found in the first sin when the serpent enticed Eve. So I hope you're not surprised by the fact that Eve's sin is also associated with her lust. We read, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. Eve was guilty of lust. Because sex isn't the problem in lust any more than food is the problem in gluttony. At its core, our struggle with lust goes much deeper. I think a broader and more encompassing definition of lust would be an overwhelming desire that uses people and things for pleasure or a way to amass power. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In 1963, Sherwood Schwartz began to finalize the ideas and themes behind a new television show. The show is going to be based on 5 passengers and 2 crew members who plan to embark on a relaxing pleasure cruise. But that 3-hour tour quickly turned disastrous, and the weather started getting rough, and eventually the SS Minnow became shipwrecked on a remote island that wasn't located on any map. With the ship in ruins, the castaways had to learn how to survive to get off the island. Now, the plan was that this new show would serve as a social microcosm on how we could all come together and get along. Mr. Schwartz made the decision that each of the characters would have a fatal flaw, something that would cause strife and angst with the other castaways. The professor represented pride. The skipper, he struggled with anger. Marianne dealt with her envy. Thurston Howell, of course, was greed. And Lovey Howell was sloth. Gilligan was gluttony. And as you already know, Ginger was lust. Sherwood Schwartz crafted Ginger as a Hollywood starlet. He originally wanted a cross between Marilyn Monroe and Lucille Ball. But what it evolved into was something entirely different. Sure, Ginger was good looking. She was a sophisticated movie star, but there's this other side to her as well. She's the most powerful castaway on the island. She would use her looks to get her way with the men castaways. She used her youth to get her way with Miss Howell, and she used her big city knowledge to get her way with Marianne. Ginger believed that she was the most important person on that island and that everybody else was there for her disposal. She never considered that the other castaways were actually people created in the image of God. She merely saw them as a means to get what she wanted. The difference between love and lust is very much like the difference between night and day. A relationship built on love is a place where you can find peace and comfort. People that are engaged in a loving relationship can be intimate. They can be vulnerable with one another. A relationship built on love gives you the space to grow and to mature over the years. Lust, on the other hand, is all about power and control. In 2 Samuel 13, there's this horrible story about David's children. There's Amnon and Tamar. They're half brothers and sisters. David was their dad, but they both had different moms. The story goes that Amnon began to notice Tamar, and eventually his noticing grew into infatuation and desire and then lust. He told his best friend about his love for his half-sister, and they crafted this plan where Amnon would pretend to be sick, and he would ask his dad, David, to send Tamar to his house so that she could feed him, and maybe that would make him feel better. But once Tamar was in the house, Amnon sent everyone out, and he grabbed his sister and brutally raped her. And after exerting his power in violating Tamar, we read that Amnon's love turned into intense hatred. Now, you understand that he never really loved her. He only saw her as something that he could use, something for his pleasure, something that he could exert his power over. That's what lust does. It dehumanizes other people. It strips the value and worth away from the object of our lust, which is why pornography is so dangerous. Because when you're looking at it, it's easy to forget that the person on the printed page or on the other side of that computer screen is created in the image of God. We just see them as something that we use for our entertainment or for our pleasure. And it's not just visual pornography. There's pornographic books and novels. They might not have the pictures in them, but the words in that book describe a partner who's always handsome, ready, willing, and able. A partner that will enjoy doing whatever you enjoy. They present a man and a woman in a relationship that is so far removed from reality that it's laughable. I mean, have you ever noticed that people in those novels and in those movies never belch? They never go to the restroom. They barely eat. Their fingernails are always clean. They never sweat. They never even need deodorant. They live in a fantasy world where the victim is always rescued, the foe is always vanquished, and the tender guy, well, he has all the time in the world to sit and cuddle with you for hours while he listens to your feelings and shares his own feelings. Our struggle with lust stems from this siren call that what we read or what we see is always available to do whatever you want them to do. You're in complete control, and what you're lusting after is at your beck and call. It serves your needs. It's all about being in control and having power. This might be helpful to listen to what Jesus says about the issue of power, authority, and influence in Matthew 20, starting in verse 25. He says, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many." The reason that lust is so deadly is because it causes us to believe this lie that power gives us control. We assume we can control all of the situations in our life, or that we can control our own destiny. We think that just because we have the power to do something, then it has to be acceptable. That our own self-interest holds the highest value. Lust causes us to ignore the thought of consequences, and eventually we overlook the dangers that are the results of our actions. We become blinded by this lust for power, and in the end, the lust for power never provides us with control. It strips us of it. Every one of us are tempted to use other people for the fulfillment of our own desires. But we have to remember that we're here, as Jesus said, to serve, not to be served. We're here to put the needs of other people first. We're here to give one another preference, to try to find ways to take care of one another. We gather as a church family with the intent to feed one another more than we are to be fed. After all, we're not the center of the universe. It's not all about me. Our lust causes us to reason and to justify our sin to the point that it becomes easier and easier to dismiss the value of others. The lust for power always leads to a downward spiral of sin piled on top of sin, whether those sins be in sexual nature or otherwise. That's why Jesus points us back to the upside down nature of his kingdom. If we want to have a closer relationship with Jesus, we have to strive to control our lusts. Paul writes to the church in Rome, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Renewal always begins in our minds. We change the way we think, and our behavior follows. Desire it's a powerful thing, and we often underestimate its force. We hold on until we get into the heat of the moment, and then we struggle with lust, and we get filled with regret and shame. Because we're so prudish about so many things, we've been guilty of making people carry around all this guilt because they had a sexual thought. The temptation in itself is not sinful. In my mind, it's an awful lot like when we talked about anger. Remember, Jesus said, don't be angry with your brother. But how do you stop the feelings of anger? I mean, if I were to walk up and to punch you in the nose, you're going to get angry. The important question is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to allow that anger to flare up and to respond in a violent way? Are you going to allow that anger to develop into bitterness and resentment? Or are you going to deal with that anger in a godly way? I think the same thing holds true for lust. Jesus isn't talking about our reaction to an unexpected and unavoidable exposure to a sexual temptation. If a man were to go to the gym or the mall or the park and see a woman who is provocatively dressed, Satan is going to tempt that man with lustful thoughts. But the important question for us is, what are you going to do with that thought? Because you have two choices. You can allow that thought to simmer. You can continue to look in order to satisfy your lustful desire. Or you can make every effort to resist temptation, to turn your gaze and your thoughts somewhere else. In the book of Job, we find Job talking with God and professing his innocence. And in the 31st chapter, he makes this beautiful statement. He says, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look with lust at a young woman. I think Job understands that if you refuse to dwell, to stare, to gawk at a woman, you will be able to better resist the urge to lust. You see, lust isn't just seeing a beautiful man or a beautiful woman and finding them attractive. Job says he refused to look so that he may satisfy his evil desire. It'd be like us saying that we made a covenant with our eyes so that we won't watch certain movies or TV shows. We made a covenant to avoid surfing the internet, knowing full well that we might accidentally stumble across a website that causes us to forget the person on the other side of the screen is someone's son or daughter created in the image of God. We refuse to read that book because we understand that it imagines this fake narrative of a perfect and unhealthy relationship. The only way that we defeat the sin of lust in our lives is to transform the way we think. I heard a story about a man in Qatar who was caught stealing, and the penalty was for him to have his hand cut off. Sometime later, though, he was caught stealing a second time. And so they cut off his other hand, thinking surely a man with no hands can't steal. That takes care of the problem, right? But to their surprise, they caught him stealing a third time, this time using his teeth to take items that didn't belong to him. You see, sin is a heart problem. And it doesn't matter what part of your body you cut off, it'll never fix the problem in your heart and in your mind. Job knew the importance of being careful at what he was looking at, so he determined in advance to guard himself by making a covenant with his eyes, not to gaze or gawk at a woman who might be a temptation to him. And he did more than just make a covenant not to look somewhere. It seems that he's also making a covenant to turn his gaze somewhere else. He is, in essence, inviting us to join him in gazing at God. You want to win the battle of lust in your life? Strive to see people created in the image of God. Turn your eyes and look at God. Like Job, make a covenant with your eyes to gaze only upon things that are pleasing and honoring and bring glory to God. Train your eyes, train your thoughts to look for God, to look for His goodness in this community so that we will find ways to experience the life as He created us to live it. As we get ready to go to the tables this morning, we're being invited to see the world as our Creator sees the world. When God looks at us, He sees us as the object of His affection. Jesus went to the cross as a sacrifice of His love and compassion, His grace and His mercy. It's my prayer that we will be able to see one another the way that God sees us. Because the cure for lust is not to refuse to see the world. The cure for lust is to see God and then see the world through the way that you see our Father. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you for participating in this series with us. And it's my hope and prayer that your time at the table this morning will be beneficial to the way that you see God in your life and in this community. Have a great week. Never forget how deeply you're loved. I look forward to seeing you very soon.